What's up, guys? This is probably one of the most iconic controllers. So many people have so many memories playing their Super Nintendos growing up that the design of this controller is basically etched into everyone's memory. At least everyone who grew up in that era. And while these controllers are still pretty easy to find and still relatively affordable, I perused eBay and saw these selling for anywhere from 12 to 30 bucks. It's a hard thing to admit, but these controllers are starting to get old. The membranes in them are wearing out, or whenever you go to order one off of eBay, you don't know what you're getting. Is it still fairly new and in really good condition, or has the person who's selling it beat the living hell out of it and you're barely going to get any reaction out of the buttons? You don't know. What do you do in those cases? Most people are going to go looking for a third-party option, something that some other company might have made that they can get new, so that way they know that they're going to actually get a usable controller. And I know third-party companies have a bad reputation, especially when it comes to controllers, because they tend to be terrible. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to third-party controllers being terrible. 8BitDo is a prime candidate for a company that makes third-party controllers that just are, for lack of a better term, wonderful. But companies like Hyperkin and Circa and Tomy, they're the third-party companies that tend to have a reputation for all of their products, but particularly their controllers, to be kind of terrible. But what I want to talk about today is the Hyperkin Scout and how that bad reputation might just not be a problem anymore. Let's take it to the desk, we'll unbox this, and we'll talk a little bit about why this controller is not half bad. All right. Let's unbox this thing and let's show you how it comes fresh from Hyperkin. So obviously I have opened this thing already. I've already got the tape off the sides here, but whenever these things are actually sealed up, these little pull tabs here can be a pain in the butt to get free. And there it is. Now, if you're like me, the first thing you'll probably notice is that this actually is a decent bit heavier. I have an SNS 102 model controller here. It does have a good heft to it. I know people complain about Hyperkin's low quality of their stuff. I believe this at least does feel sort of premium. Now, it does not feel as premium as something like the 8BitDo controller, but that's beside the point. That's not what we're comparing it to here. As far as feel in the hand goes, these controllers do appear to be roughly about the same size. The Hyperkin controller here is ever so slightly smaller as far as the width of the controller goes. I will put these together and let you actually see what I'm talking about. There we go, I leveled them against the table, and as you can see, the Super Nintendo controller is just ever so slightly wider than the Hyperkin controller here. But it's so small that I don't think that that's actually a noticeable difference in the hand. The plastic of the Hyperkin controller, it doesn't feel cheap like you'd expect whenever you would be getting a third-party controller like this. Now, it doesn't feel quite as nice as the SNS 102, and it definitely doesn't feel anywhere near as nice as the 8BitDo controller. For 15 bucks, I would have expected this to be a lot worse feeling in the hand than it actually is. This is actually quite nice just to hold on to and feel. Hyperkin did add something that I think is very beneficial to the player, and on the back here, you see that they actually beveled out the bottom of the controller here. As you're playing whatever game, it gives your fingers something to find and a place just to naturally rest. So that way you can have a good hold on the controller. I'm not going to knock the Super Nintendo controller on that because that's not something that was really thought about too much back in the day. Although you could argue that Nintendo still doesn't think about it with the Switch Joy-Con, but that's beside the point. In the modern age of gaming, any kind of ergonomic addition is a major plus in my book. You'll notice that the cable for the Hyperkin Scout is actually very, very long. The box labels it as a 10-foot cable, and I'm pretty sure the original Super Nintendo controller only had a 6-foot cable. Let's just take a gander at how much more cable there is than the original model controller. There we go, there's the end. And there is how much extra cable you have. Looks like it's about 2 feet more, maybe 2.5. So it's not going to be the most game-changing thing in the world, but if your console is just a little bit further away from you than you like, this will give you a bit more leeway in where you're actually able to sit while you play games. And speaking of that cable, this is actually a very, very robust cable. As you can see here, it's about the same diameter as the original Super Nintendo cable. Not as flexible, but that's probably from the age of the Super Nintendo controller. Now on Hyperkin's Captain, which is the N64 controller, I had some gripes about the connector at the end, that it definitely felt cheap. It felt like even a cheaper plastic than the controller was made out of. It came apart on me, if you remember. And while the connectors here definitely do feel different from each other, this one feels to be a lot more robust than the Captain's was. I'm not concerned at all about this thing coming apart on me while I'm trying to put it in or take it out of the console. The plastic is definitely a little bit worse than the OEM controller, but it is nowhere near anything that I would consider to be a problem. I do want to note that my original SNES controller here is fairly old. So this is an SNES 102 model controller that came with my Super Nintendo whenever I bought it from my game store. While this wasn't the controller that shipped with the Super Nintendo, this model did discontinue in 2003. So this controller is at least 20 years old. So the button feel might be a little weak compared to what it used to feel like and compared to what you might be accustomed to or remember. But having said that, I fully admit that the buttons here do feel soft. Like, they all respond very well whenever I played the Super Nintendo, but there's no denying that they do feel a little mushy. These being that membrane in there being new, there is a definite feedback whenever you press any of these buttons here. And it wouldn't be a controller video without doing a sound test, so let's do that right now. Whenever I was looking at reviews on all these Hyperkin controllers online, one thing that seemed to be a common thread was that people were saying that you would get incorrect D-pad inputs. Like, if you're pressing left, you might sometimes get down left. If you're pressing down, you might sometimes get down right. People online were saying that it was difficult to get a correct input, and I've got to say, I didn't actually find that to be too much of the case. Now, I will say it is easier to hit your diagonals than it is on the OEM here. On this one, I have to be very intentional whenever I want to go to like a diagonal here. Like, I can press left and right, I can press right, and I could actually rock back and forth a little bit and not get a diagonal, and I have to actually make a concerted effort to press two directions at the same time. I don't have to be as intentional with this one. I still had to be intentional, but I could achieve the same thing with more just a rock of my thumb rather than having to fully transition to pressing both of them at the same time. I could just be here, rock up, and I'd be getting it. Here, rock down, I'd be getting it. Whereas instead of on this one, I had to be here and then really almost push my thumb in the other direction. That might be just a fault of the age of this controller, or that might be the intention and people are just sloppy with their thumb movements on this controller. Either way, I still had to be very intentional with my movements to get a diagonal press, and that to me is perfectly fine in a controller. I'll show you some little clips right now. I was testing it on Super Metroid. I managed to get both the mock ball trick to pop off first try, and I was able to get that early E-Tank and Brinstar with that bomb jump trick without much of any trouble. And either of those would be nigh impossible if I was getting unintentional directional inputs or button inputs. So yeah, I kind of like this thing. And while I haven't had it for very long, it definitely feels like a pretty solid controller just from the tests that I've done with it. And for $15 for a controller that feels as good as this one, it's hard to complain. I'll be very interested to see how it holds up over the weeks and months to actual long-term use. But for the short little time I've had it, I can't complain. But that's just me. What do you guys think? Have you used this controller before? If so, what do you think of it? I understand that some people aren't a fan of Hyperkin. And while I understand, given the history of some of their products, I think it might be time to revisit the brand. This is leaps and bounds better than something like the Retron 3 that I got back in 2017 that I talked about last year. So if you're curious, hey, give them a shot. It's 15 bucks. It's hard to say no to a deal like that, you know? But that's gonna be it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I look forward to bringing you guys even more reviews like this as the days go on. So again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one, y'all.